The word economics comes from the Greek oikos, meaning house, family, household, and nomos, law or custom. And hence means the household management or administration of the state. And it can be defined as a study of how people seek to satisfy their wants. Okay, there we go. Economics is viewed as harder than many of the other social sciences because the data are empirically observed and not experimentally generated. Here's the thing, okay? You can go to a laboratory, you can get a mixture of chemicals, you can put them together, and you can observe what's going to happen, and you can calculate in advance what might happen and that sort of thing. Well, economics and the social sciences are a little bit harder because, it's hard to take a whole community, put it in a test tube, bring it to a laboratory and do that sort of thing with it. So here's what you do instead of setting up experiments in the laboratory. What you have to do is you have to observe what is happening in the real world and use scientific processes to analyze what's going on. And one of the things that happens is this field of econometrics, which uses statistical analysis of economic data to determine whether there's just mere correlation or if there's direct causation. And this is what's supposed to make economics a science, that they can determine correlation or direct causation using all of this social data. Okay. We talked about this a bit yesterday. The major economic schools, the Austrian, the British, and the Lausanne School. Let's take a look at these three quickly. Austrian school started by Karl Menger. And here's the thing about the Austrian school. It rejected positivism. The Austrian school never got away from the fact that economics is at its core moral philosophy. And so they always had a very humble view of what economics was actually capable of doing. David Hilbert was one of the guys associated with the Austrian school who applied a lot of mathematics to economics to come up with what's called general equilibrium theory and also game theory. John von Neumann developed some of the basic ideas behind game theory. All of these guys applied mathematical approaches. And as they applied the mathematical approaches to economics, some thought it was becoming more like the sciences. Now, the Austrians still viewed it as moral philosophy. But when you get to the British school, let me tell you, these guys, they went the route of positivism. Now, Alfred Marshall studied under the school of moral philosophy. Political economy was under moral philosophy. But one of the things that he did was he bought into the whole idea of positivism. And one of the things that he did is he really mathematized the study of political economy. And so here are some of the guys who were with him who were largely responsible for that. William Stanley Jevons, he was huge in mathematizing it. Francis Isidro Edgeworth, he is known for doing his Edgeworth box. And one of the things that you do wind up doing with the Edgeworth box is you're looking at people's utilities using what are called indifference curves. And let me tell you, there's lots of ethical implications that come directly from this. But here's the thing. they don't want to acknowledge that there is a moral dimension to economics. This guy, John Neville Keynes, he divided economics into positive, normative, and applied branches. And today, if you go to school to study economics, all you're going to get is positive economics. They're simply not going to acknowledge the normative dimensions of it. John Maynard Keynes developed macroeconomics. And here's the thing. He was really kind of schizo about the whole thing. Because on the one hand, he pretended, well, he argued for positivism, but there was always a moral argument behind why governments should intervene in the market. The Lausanne School is known as the mathematical school. They also developed general equilibrium theory. And Vito Volterra, he really used a lot of mathematics to develop economic models. But this guy in particular, Vilfredo Pareto, a lot of his ideas are so loaded with moral philosophy, and they just use these. It's because his ideas they're heavily mathematical, but they're so loaded with moral philosophy that it's amazing that you have people use these ideas, but somehow they turn a blind eye to the normative aspects. So you have this guy, Lionel Robbins, who defines economics as a science which studies human behavior as relations between scarce means having alternative uses. Well, that's fine, but even that definition is loaded with moral dimension, has a moral aspect to it. Well, this clicker must be, battery's weak or something. Oh, there we go. Oh, we're back. Okay, there we go. Milton Friedman. The whole Chicago school, the University of Chicago, didn't matter whether you're talking about their law school, didn't matter whether you're talking about their economics school or their sociology school, they were eaten up with positivism. They were trying to make economics a science. And one of the interesting things is the University of Chicago in their economics program became one of the leading programs in economics. And so by the 1980s, what they started to do was get rid of certain things in their PhD program in economics. They started to get rid of the history of economics, philosophy of economics. They started getting rid of all of these sort of things and focus only on what was mathematical because they were trying to make economics a science. And because economics is the most scientific, or appears to be the most scientific of all the social sciences, its techniques have bled into all the other social sciences. In fact, political science today is just overrun with econometric techniques. Sociology today is getting more and more of its ideas from using the econometric techniques that are used in economics. Because these disciplines also want to become more scientific. But if economics is a science, why is there so much disagreement? Well, here's one reason. Science can't provide certainty. Now, in the field of microeconomics, there isn't too much disagreement. But in macroeconomics, that's where you really have the high priestesses or the high priests of knowledge on television. These guys who, use all the smoke and mirrors and use all the complex phrases and everything to try to convince you that they know what's going to happen. But none of them predicted the economic downturn in 2007, 2008. There are disagreements in approaches to econometric techniques when you apply it to macroeconomics, not when you apply it to microeconomics. And for this reason, there are great disagreements in forecasting techniques. Now, we looked at this the other day, the flow of money from households to firms, and how that results in different sorts of markets, the resource markets and the product markets. And you guys have heard about the debates between John Maynard Keynes and Friedrich von Hayek. Now, the thing about Hayek and the Austrian school is they believe that it's still basically moral philosophy. But when you get to guys like Keynes, they got this really complex scheme here. You've got governments, financial markets, foreign markets, households, corporations, workforces, and they believe that they can reduce everything to a mathematical formula. Well, if that's the case, how come these guys get it wrong so often? Is there a way we can, okay. I don't know what happened here. Okay. But the bottom line is this. One of the reasons that there's so much disagreement in economics is this. A lot of the guys in macroeconomics try to do a lot more than can realistically be done. Because at the end of the day, economics is moral philosophy. And all the mathematization in the world can't make it a science. Now, there's a lot that it can do, but there's a lot that it can't do. And the sooner that people face up to that, well, the better off everybody's going to be. There is a field today in economics, started at the University of Chicago, called New Institutional Economics. And what is happening in New Institutional Economics is this. Basically, morality is making its way back in. They're realizing that the mathematics leaves out all of these moral dimensions that you have to take into account if an economy is going to work. Now, one of the things that happened when Jay Richards was here, last night he talked about you need the rule of law. The rule of law even has a moral dimension to it. If you don't have the rule of law, you can't make an economic system work the way it should. And if you don't have morality, you can't make it work the way it should. So here's just a few conclusions, okay? Economics comes from moral philosophy, and by the way, still belongs there. Auguste Comte's positivism separated the different branches of moral philosophy from each other and turned them into the social sciences. So it's classified, economics is classified as a social science, but it's still moral philosophy. And even with all the math modeling, it's still moral philosophy. Mathematics is what makes economics the most difficult of the social sciences and the most empirical of the social sciences, but there's still a moral dimension to it. There's just no getting away from it, folks. And if you really want to be where the exciting stuff is happening in economics, well, I think the exciting place is where they're integrating morality back into the system. So, questions? Yes? Well, here's the interesting thing. What we now consider the hard sciences were part of what used to be called natural philosophy. And I think on the one hand, it can be useful to describe the hard sciences, to separate them from philosophy, but at the end of the day, even hard science, when you take it far down the road, for example, astrophysics, sooner or later you wind up with philosophical questions that they just plain can't answer. That quote, science can't answer. And what you wind up with is philosophy. So I think people kid themselves into thinking that the human mind is far more capable than it actually is. Testing can provide a lot of information, but it can't provide all the answers. Yes?
So you talked about econometrics and the statistical analysis of economic data. And you touched on this too. It seems to me when economists make their predictions, they're virtually never right. I mean, you have them taking surveys or whatever of the top economists saying this is going to increase by 3% or whatever they say, and it's almost never accurate. So taking that into account, do you think direct causation is ever really a reality, or how often is it a reality?
Well, in macroeconomics, it almost never is. You know, this is why a lot of presidents, they want to look for a one-armed economist, because they're tired of guys saying, on the one hand, this could happen, but on the other hand, the other thing could happen. Yeah, the forecasting techniques have gotten so incredibly sophisticated. I mean, and what happens is they're still wrong more often than not. When I was taking my course in macroeconomic theory, as we came to the end of the semester, they had us studying what are called dynamic stochastic general equilibrium models. And this stuff gets real nasty real fast. And at the PhD level, this is what they're doing in macroeconomics. They're generating all of these incredible programs that take in a certain amount of data so that they should be able to predict what's going to happen next. Not a single one of those models predicted the economic crash in 2007, 2008. Not a single one. Robert Solow, who was a Nobel Prize winner in economics, afterwards, he began to look at the whole situation with these dynamic stochastic general equilibrium models. And he says, well, in retrospect, he says, I guess we should have expected this because some of this didn't pass the sniff test. I love his use of that phrase. It didn't pass the sniff test. Yes.
But in a sense, don't they see bubbles forming?
Yes.
They do see bubbles forming, and so they know something's coming.
Yes, yes, people can see the bubbles, but the mathematical equations don't capture the bubbles. That's the problem. Oh, yeah, because let me tell you, the guys who did predict the economic crash in 2007, 2008, they looked at things like asymmetrical information. They looked at adverse selection, they could see that happening, and they could see the moral hazard happening. And so those guys were able to predict what was going to happen. What's that? Well, I don't think that most of them really gave positivism or morality that much thought, but they just used basic principles rather than going to these econometric techniques that take all the statistics and mathematics and try to come up with a solution. You had better believe it. He said that it was arrogance on their part. There's no two ways about it.
Is that, I mean, do you think that is sort of the motivation for this sort of positivism or mathematic, trying to put it all into equation, is thinking that we can understand everything? Or like why would the Chicago school be so motivated to be like that? Or
Well, the Chicago school operated with something that was happening at the whole University of Chicago. The whole University of Chicago was eaten up with positivism. You find this in the sociology department, the law department, the political science department. They were just eaten up with positivism. And they were trying to turn the social sciences into sciences. So they mathematized everything. And they were real big about empirical data. And so basically they operated with the wrong philosophical worldview that provided some useful things, but also provided a lot of problems. Now, one of the things that also has to be said in all fairness to the University of Chicago is, past a certain point, they didn't buy into the Keynesian approach to macroeconomic theory. And in fact, they never really fully did buy into macroeconomic theory, at least as it was taught by Keynes. And so they took a different approach, but they made some of the same mistakes because they also used the dynamic stochastic general equilibrium models. Yes? Mm-hmm.
And then those guys were sent into Chile and Argentina, which, in my understanding, had results of liberation theology and socialism had all kinds of implications, morally and economically. So I'm trying to put that together.
Well, here's the thing. One of the things that happened with the University of Chicago, these guys, one of the things that they did was they didn't buy into classical Keynesian economic theory. And so what they did was what's called new classical macroeconomics. They made what was really kind of a return to what the approach to the macro level of economics that was done before Keynes. They applied microeconomic principles to macroeconomic problems. And so because of that, the approaches were basically pretty simple and pretty reliable. And this is why they were able to take these ideas and to go to other countries that had very serious macroeconomic problems and solve them. Initially with a lot of pain, okay? Because the analogy I made yesterday, it's like the man who's on heroin. When he gets off the heroin, he's going to be better off in the long run. But in the short run, he's going to be in a lot of pain. And so what happened with the Chicago boys as they went to different places, what they told all these other countries that had these economic problems, look, you've got to get rid of these social programs. You've got to stop spending more than you take in. You've got to do these very simple, basic economic solutions. And it's going to hurt in the short run, but in the long run, you'll be better off. And for the most part, that's how it worked out. That, that's not so much science. That's really more common sense than anything else. Other questions? Well, I realize, in retrospect, that, that was pretty philosophically loaded stuff. And I hope that I didn't lose too many of you. But, the bottom line is this. No matter how much mathematics you pour into the social sciences, at the end of the day, there's still moral philosophy.
Thank you, Dr. Mitchell.